would like to say at this point, hello to everyone, and on behalf of HP, let me welcome you to the second installment of our webinar series. Very quickly, allow me to introduce myself. I think you can see by the screen. My name is Rick Bravo, and I am part of the global business development team within HP's PageWide Industrial Business. I've been with HP now about 7 years. And I've had various roles across the company in graphic strategy, including positions allowing me to see our Indigo, Cytex, DesignJet, Latex businesses. And one of the things that I've been fascinated by is how at the core of all these 7 years, publishing has remained a central strategy as part of our graphics solutions business. And so, next slide. I think one of the first things that we needed to do is consider first why HP and why the Publishing 2020 Vision webinar series. So first, let me reinforce that and highlight that HP has an entrepreneurial spirit at its core. It's one of the founding members of Silicon Valley, based in California. And the company vision is to create technology that makes life better for everyone, everywhere. Every person, every organization, community around the globe. It's what inspires us. It is what motivates us to invent and to reinvent. And I think true to the original inspiration that the founders had for our organization, this webinar is very much in that spirit within the company mission, which is to reinvent and to adopt a forward-thinking philosophy. So these webinars over the coming months, so we just concluded our first one a couple of weeks back. We'll continue to explore and discuss a wide range of topics around trends and dynamics for the publishing industry that are changing and transforming it. I think undoubtedly the impact of the global pandemic this past year is going to persist for a while. And so we thought to bring together some of the most informed voices to discuss what the future may hold. And obviously the driving goal behind this series is to explore the positive changes and developments that can drive publishing in 2020 and beyond. So with that, let me look at the next slide to give you a little bit of insight into HP and our role within the publishing industry. We've been a leader in digital print for about 30 years now, and for the last 12 most recent years, we've been providing print-on-demand services with our HP Indigo and PageWide Industrial presses. Since 2008, we have printed over 250 billion A4 book pages. Yes, you heard that number right, 250 billion A4 book pages, which makes us really the #1 inkjet player in book printing. We've done that across a network of global print service providers. HP technology is doing the printing at many of the top 20 global publishers today. This is done through our installed base of over 50 customers, offering print services in 18 countries around the globe. And we expect those numbers to increase. And in short, I think we are very active in the industry with our digital print technology. But certainly we want to move beyond just the hardware aspect of the business, and we're looking at how to deliver end-to-end solutions that will create incremental value and new business opportunities. So that brings us to our solution that we announced at the London Book Fair just a couple of years back, which is HP Piazza, which is a cloud-based solution for content management to allow publishers to distribute books and manage their supply chain from their existing content almost anywhere in the world. This allows publishers to ingest their content into a safe and secure cloud-based system. By ingesting content into Piazza, this ensures content will be fully optimized and ready for digital print, stored in a print-ready format, being able to print wherever and whenever needed. So when a title is needed, it can be pushed out for automated production via HP SiteFlow to a global network of print service providers, many of which that I just mentioned. So that is just a high-level overview of how we're involved in the industry, and we're very excited to be involved in this continuing webinar series. I just want to do a couple of quick housekeeping notes before I introduce you to our moderator for today. We'll be running for about the next 55 minutes until the top of the hour. And that time will also include time for questions, which we will have at the end. These questions will be moderated by the HP team. So if you do have questions, please use the chat function at the bottom of your screen. Indicate if there's a specific panelist that you prefer to answer. Feel free to load them as we go, as they come top of mind throughout the webinar. And on that note, I would now like to introduce you to our moderator today, Mr. Simon Crump. Simon is a publishing professional who's been in the business for 25 years. He's worked for a number of major publishing houses in academic publishing, such as Cambridge University Press and Elsevier. He started at the Institute of Materials in London, where he learned with hands-on experience about the production process from manuscript to bound book. Since then, as his career has progressed, he has moved more and more to the manufacturing end of the process. And there's nothing Simon loves more than a beautifully printed and bound book. I couldn't agree more, Simon. And so without further ado, I hand it over to you, Simon. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. I'd like to thank HP for arranging these seminars and also Rick for your introduction. As we all know, 2020 has been an exceptional year for the world. But how has the publishing industry adapted and changed as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic? In a world that was already facing continuous technological changes and environmental challenges, today we will be discussing this from a print and production perspective. Joining me today to tell us what they have been doing are Kathy Felgar. Kathy is Publishing Operations Director at Princeton University Press, where she leads the editorial, manufacturing, and digital production teams. Current initiatives include the life cycle of the book, new options for global print and distribution, DEI at PUP and within publishing, and the best practices in new titles metadata release. Jude Gates has been working in publishing production for over 20 years in legal and trade publishing. She is production director and director of Faber Factory at Faber & Faber, managing these teams that work on all print and digital products and support the independent publishing sector in the UK through ebook distribution and conversion and print services. Gareth Jarrett has spent 26 years in publishing, first in trade publishing with the Penguin Group, and more recently in academic publishing with Taylor & Francis, where he is now Director of Book Publishing Services. Whilst at TNF, he has overseen the expansion of a print and art demand program that now has over 200,000 ISBNs available in POD in up to 5 markets, which alongside conventional stock aims to maximize availability of TNF's large stable of titles across the globe without flooding the planet with excess of books. And finally, Barbara Scheroldt is Vice President Production at Penguin Random House, Verlags Group, Germany. Barbara has been in publishing for 25 years and for the last 5 years with Penguin. She is also responsible for environmental issues on behalf of the Penguin Group, and her career spans 25 years, including an international role at Pearson's. So my first question I'll start with Barbara, and to the panel is, in January 2020, you had a plan and strategy for your publishing program for the year. How has that changed due to COVID-19?
So, good question. The first 3 months of 2020 were very successful and good, and we were facing a very successful and good year with a strong plan and a good front list. So, mid of March 2020, the COVID came and immediately we had to change our plans. And so what we did was, beside all this home office issue and all this the stuff, we changed completely our schedule, our production plan, and reduced our production plan for the next couple of months and for the rest of the year, and tried to react on the demand which we saw in the market up from the lockdown. So we realized our advantage is that we are a big publishing house with a lot of different kind of books, like children books and editorial books and graphic novels and textbooks and working books and cookbooks and everything. So it was not easy, but it was possible to focus or to put the focus of our programs and of the books we brought in the market on the books which were demanded by the readers. What we realized as well after some weeks of really lockdown and the bookshops were closed and nobody was able to buy any books in our market, we realized an instant increase of demand for books, for special books again, for special kind of themes and also content, also kind of books. And so we really changed our plans. We reduced the pub plan for the front list by about in overall by 50%. And we tried to increase the backlist, which were quite successful. So in the meantime, we are back where we wanted to be, and we are quite positive for the rest of this year.
Okay, thank you, Barbara. Kathy, what are your thoughts on this?
At Princeton, we held all our spring pub dates. We had some publicity events disrupted and conferences canceled that made promoting them more challenging in some cases, but we also had quite a few successful online events. We saw a very quick pickup on e-sales that is continuing as well.
Yeah, and Gareth,
I think in terms of what publishing program coming through, we didn't really try and slow it down. I think there was an element to which the disruption in India, which mainly impacted typesetters, made it harder to get the flow of content through that we wanted for Frontlist. But overall, we tried to keep this publishing program as vibrant and coming through as quickly as possible. Where we did make changes was in how we published. We really put brakes on longer print runs where we were still doing them, and we put the emphasis on print on demand as well as ebooks to minimize the risk, whilst we understood what market we were dealing with. Where was the demand still going to come from? And as we've learned more about what the market looks like now, we are seeing some changes there clearly. We've been able to pivot and actually start to develop our strategy back from there. But in terms of keeping the publishing program going, we really tried not to stop because ultimately people still needed content.
And Jude, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, mostly the same as Barbara, actually. We looked, I think the editorial team and the publicity and marketing teams had the hardest job initially. For print, we just stopped. The editorial team took a good hard look at the publishing program. They moved out titles that they didn't think could publish well into the current situation where there weren't bookshops available. They moved a lot of big titles out. We brought forward some reissues of some backlist titles that we were working on. But we stopped our ASR program completely, so no auto stock replenishment. So we had complete control of every single, even tiny print run that was going through, just for those first few weeks where we were quite panicking.
I think that just something, so I was going to say, Simon, I think that probably shows something that's going to come very clear as we go through this, is how different parts of the market have been impacted very differently by this. Where we could see this come the summer when Amazon in particular waded back into the market quite aggressively, almost to the point that they couldn't ingest content. They were going so fast. But that was really visible in the tradier sides of the market. With institutional, by contrast, we could keep publishing because you're clearly, if you're doing large numbers of monographs or academic texts, it's not about launching in quite the same way as you do with a trade product. But by the same token, because you've got different markets you're appealing to, such as campuses which are shut down for a substantial period of time, it's how you then supply the content once you've published that changes. So it was, you know, you could see that, and you could see that talking to printers and such like about how they then reacted to it.
Thank you for that, Gareth. And picking up on that point where you say Amazon was suddenly demanding and wanting more content again, if I start with Kathy this time, what are the changes and challenges that you've had to make to your supply chain through all of this?
Well, we were already increasing POD and short-run digital about 2 years leading up to this point, as well as simultaneous US-UK printings and regional editions. And we luckily had just pivoted away from printing in China due to tariffs. But the pandemic is now really exacerbating the usual capacity strain that printers are showing this fall, US, UK. And also we're seeing some shifts in timing of customer orders that's making things really challenging.
And Gareth, any other thoughts on this?
We were already working hard to work on a global basis. Like we said, we already had over 200,000 titles on demand before we went into 2020, and that was backing up a substantial stocked print program. And we were printing in 5 markets at that point: UK, US, Singapore, Australia, and India. I think COVID really just accelerated what was already a trend that was there. You know, just as it accelerated the changes in demand patterns between different parts of the market, just as you know, with institutional sales were the ones that were particularly impacted, and so books that were predominantly aimed at those markets, at library sellers, you know, were where really you just wanted to go print on demand now, and understand the market and build out from there. Other books which were more likely to sell to internet sellers, not just Amazon, but the Blackwells online and so on and so forth. You know, it was a slightly different approach. And as soon as you could calibrate and understand what their demand was likely to be going forwards, for example, once Gardners had got a sense in the UK that they could function once again, they still had enough capacity, because initially they were working on a substantially scaled back whilst trying to work out how to work in a socially distanced manner. These, you know, once they got that and you could work out and understand where their demand was coming from, then you could plan for it. So it's been an ongoing journey, and it really has just pushed to the point of hold little stock, hold only what you need, and be agile and respond to demand when it comes along.
Okay, thank you for that. That's obviously from an institutional approach. So if I now ask Jude, more from a fiction and general approach, what are changes and thoughts have you seen to your challenges to your supply chain?
I think initially the challenge for us was we had a lot of staff on furlough, so it was managing the supply chain and managing, you know, deliveries with very few people. Luckily, we're all back now, and that period is over. But that was very stressful, I think, for everybody. And at that point, we were very worried about our printers. You know, there's not a lot of choice in the UK. The choice that is there, they're good printers, but we were concerned about their ability to carry on, and they did carry on, which we were so relieved about. They carried on completely fine without stopping. We stopped printing, they didn't. They carried on. I think, you know, their numbers fell off a cliff in April, like everybody's, but then they kept going. So so as our print runs built up again, they managed to match that for us. So the main challenges, you know, we had everything in ebook anyway, we had a big print on demand and big ASR program, so that content was already available, and we're very used to switching from litho to digital and doing those changes to the cover finishes and the plate sections if necessary. So that was not particularly the issue. I think there's a question a bit later on about more the processes that we had to change, and that sort of affected us more. We didn't have any supply problems really at the beginning. I think the amount of publishing that's going on now is causing issues, so that's going to be a bit more challenging coming up.
Okay, and Barbara, what are your thoughts on that? Anything new to add, or?
In a way the same, or the rest of the people said already. So we also we reduced our print runs, of course, and tried to be very careful with what we printed, because we did not know if it sells or not. We had the problem that, or not the problem, what we did immediately at the beginning, we decided to print only in Germany and we stopped printing abroad, because we were afraid of the closed frontiers, and we did not know how the supply in our country would be from East Europe, from Italy, from somewhere. After 4 weeks, we changed this again, because we realized the freight, the frontier issue was not a problem. The main problem we focused with was then the short time work at a lot of printers. Also, we worked short time, so we reduced the working time, and so it was, even if there were not such a lot of orders and workload for the printers, there were no people doing the jobs because they were at home. So in a way, this was the problem to always get what we wanted.
Okay, thank you for that. You've all been mentioning the use and growth, more of using POD, more of using ebooks and so forth, which is obviously, I know that was the trend that a lot of people were doing anyway, but has this pandemic, has this period pushed your changes around what you're considering when you're considering how you're actually going to manufacture a book? Are you using different papers? Are you changing your quantities? Is it just going to go into POD? Have your own SLAs on anything changed? You're obviously talking about the fact that printers are and aren't working, or they're reduced. Well, what are your thoughts with that, Gareth?
It's about trends that are already there. You know, because we were trying to move so much towards short run / on demand, depending on our model had already been print as appropriate to the product in that market. So we might stock it in the UK or the US, but it might well, in fact, most of our titles published straight into on demand in Singapore and Australia. There was little point in shipping books all the way around the world. You might as well print them there when they're needed for that customer. So to do that, we already had to be in a position, and we've been working for a few years, to standardize papers where possible, to, you know, mainly because it's academic, 80-gram offset, 90-gram coated papers, which will go for 90% of our product. You know, there are specialist titles, but the majority of them would sit within that. So we've been working on that already. We're already planning and have reduced the number of formats that we're now putting our new titles in terms of trim page sizes. It's still too many for some printers, as they keep telling me, but we keep trying to drag that number down. So again, it's about accelerating and accentuating rather than transforming, because to do what we're already doing, we had to be there. But it's in that area where you're just trying to make it as simple for printers to work as possible, and to make it as easy as possible for the book that you manufacture in the US to look like the one in Singapore and look like the one in the UK, because you know damn well you're going to get an author turn up at a conference, well, not at the moment, clearly, in Tokyo, and they'll find two books from different countries and say they don't look the same. And they have to look the same. They can't be identical, but they've got to look pretty much the same. They've got to be good, fit for purpose, presentable, well built, and you've got to, you know, and if you don't want to be fiddling around with spines and stuff, they've got to be standardized. So that's really what we've been trying to do for some time.
And Jude, what are your thoughts? Anything different that you're doing than that, or is it?
No, I agree with Gareth. I think we were heading that way, you know, tighter on the inventory, shorter runs, everything in E and audio. Well, not everything in audio, but expanding our audio program. So I think he's right. I think what we did do initially in the lockdown is publish into E first with some titles, but there was always a print. The print book might have moved out a few months, but there was always a print book coming. So we sort of just switched around the publishing dates on some of the titles, but nothing major. In terms of papers, we don't use that many. They're pretty standard trade papers. So, and because we're quite a small company, we have tight control of our trim sizes. So there's only a certain amount of formats. So nothing major other than a bit of sort of reshaping of the publishing program like we did initially.
Thank you for that. And Barbara, obviously being a large publisher, have you anything different?
No, we have been working since for years to increase standardization. What means we have standardized trim sizes, we have standardized papers. So in a way, there was no need to change anything. What we also have, we had a sort of lead buy system with some of our main sheet fed printers. So we really know which trim sizes go to which printers. So in a way, we really had a profit. It was a benefit for us that we already did our homework before. So the only thing we did was shorten print runs, be more careful and all that stuff. But at the end, we had made our homework before.
Okay, thank you. And Kathy, anything else to add, or is it?
Well, everything that's been said here is very familiar to me, but I would add that at Princeton, we have some lists with very high production values, art and architecture and natural history, and we do a lot of co-publications, including with museums, that we have to work with a variety of papers and trim sizes that constrain this. But wherever possible, I'm trying to do what Gareth and Jude and Barbara are describing.
Okay, that sounds very fair. And yes, obviously everybody has something that doesn't quite fit the mix and you have to do something for it, something different for it. Moving on now, Jude, you touched on the point that you had more issues about changing systems and processes and having to maybe develop or alter things. Can you say a bit more about that?
Yes, obviously when we were all in the office, we could run out a digital cover proof on our proofer and whack it on somebody's desk and with a sign-off form, and that was that. So we had to move to a completely digital sign-off for proofs, which is not ideal. So we need some sort of hybrid there, and that there are staff going into the office occasionally to proof entire books in the office and running out proofs, but we actually are relying on the printers a little bit more than we used to send contract proofs out to the designers for sign off. So there was quite a big change there, and just more, we have to use our biblio system we have to use it more and more accurately, because it's more difficult. You know, we can't just wander over to somebody's desk to check something. The dates on the system have to be more reliable. But I also found that we're so used to it in production, aren't we, being the last in the chain and getting squeezed for the time, and you know, we run out of time. And I'm starting to realize we have to fight a little bit harder to have that time, because everything is just a little bit slower. You know, the sign-off processes, you know, you see someone at their desk, you put the proof in front of them, they sign it off. You don't know, you know, you send an email, you don't know if they're there. Things are slower in that respect. And I think checking things on screen as well. Our pre-press department switched to a double sign-off on the covers, just because it's a little bit harder to check things on screen and not have that security of printing it out as well. So so yeah, there's been quite a lot, and we're just sort of discovering things as we go as well. So I think communication in that respect, and just keeping people in the loop. Advances, that was another one. People were like, I can't get hold of my advances, so relying on printers to send out advance copies directly to editors' houses. We didn't get involved with author copies. We managed to avoid that, but you know, there's little things like that where you just naturally, everything would be in the office. So relying on the printers a lot more for direct deliveries of 1 and 2 titles to home addresses.
Barbara, has that been the same for you, or
Yeah.
have you?
Yes, but what we did not do, not at all, we never sent any copies or advances to somebody at home. So we really got rid of all these advances. We got rid of all the proofs and of printouts. So we told people there is no way at the moment, there is no printer available, no printing machine in the office available anymore. There is no proof available anymore. So you have to go digital. You have to go through your texts by PDF or Acrobat or something like that. You have to believe in the soft proof, and at the end of the day nobody will die because a color on a cover is like a bit another red as I wanted the red to be. And at the end of the day, after some months coming back to the office, people got their advances then in the office, and there was not one reclamation at the end of the day by a customer or an editor or so. So in a way, we saw all these special things we did before, all this effort we did, like checking and checking and checking again. I don't want to say that is not worth anymore, but we are much more careful with it in the meantime. So we got rid of a lot of ballast through COVID. It's a positive
But it's a
signal in a
positive
way.
way
Yeah,
forward.
effect,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. And Kathy, what about you? Obviously, you have, as you've said, these architectural books and things and so forth, which do need a lot of proofing. How have you managed?
Well, we have gone digital as much as possible, but we do have some proofs still being mailed to people's homes, and we're still sending out advances to authors. We do it when necessary.
Okay. And Gareth, anything else to add, or is it?
Not much, I think. I mean, everything that's been said already is valid. We already dropped a lot of the paper-based movements, but you know, over the spring when you didn't know where people were going to be, whether you could access them, whether you could get content into them. So whether it's author copies or review copies or even, you know, students who've supposed to be getting hold of this book in their library, but they couldn't do it. We had to lean very heavily on electronic to do that and to make ebook versions available to people if they would have otherwise have sourced the print book, and just apologize to authors and say, you know, we can't send you a book at the moment because we don't know if it's going to make it there. And we've done some catch up on that since. But I think you're right. It forced people to question sometimes. You know, there is an assumption about what you do and what is an appropriate way of doing something. And not all change will stick, but some change inevitably will, because having proven we can do it, we'll continue to try and do that. It makes sense.
Well, as you said before we started, you know, you've managed to work through all of this with everybody being at home. So, you know, some good has come out of this, and being able to streamline processes and the ways that people are working and so forth. And I gather from what you're saying, it sounds as though a lot of these changes are going to be permanent, and you're going to keep with them because they're giving benefit to your business in many ways. But changing it slightly, and back to starting with Barbara again, have you seen any environmental issues come up because of COVID-19 or anything new? Because I know that, you know, or before COVID-19, there was always a push of how can you get plastics out of the system? There's a lot of shrink wrapping goes on.
To be honest, in the first weeks of COVID-19, nobody cared about the environment anymore because we had our other problems. And in a way, everybody said, now we make a lot of good things for the environment because nobody is traveling anymore, nobody is using the car anymore, nobody is doing something anymore. So what is the problem? But to be honest, or to be serious, we know the main focus in the last couple of months was not the environment, but it was to be available, to deliver, to sell books, and to be able to produce them. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, and Kathy, what about you?
We were already discussing a big re-engagement with sustainability for the coming year. I wouldn't say it's changed because of COVID, although it may be slightly accelerated.
That's interesting you say it's been accelerated rather than, obviously Barbara's just said they kind of put on the back foot to begin with
Well, what I'm thinking of is more printing to local market instead of shipping books around the world.
Right. Okay. And Gareth, anything else to add or?
Not really. I mean, shipping clearly has been an issue over the course of this year. It remains so. Flying books is never a great idea. It becomes almost impossible during a pandemic, and it's still a very expensive thing to do as we, continue through it. So printing locally just becomes endlessly more important. But that does put, if you look at environmental issues, apart from the CO2 footprint on that, and it becomes, it's becoming increasingly incumbent upon us to be measuring that. And that's something we've been trying to work on for the last year or so, and continue to do so to really understand what our carbon footprint is. And that will then entrench some of the changes again that are coming through from COVID. But otherwise, it's the usual things. You're printing locally, you need to understand who you're printing with. What are the best ways of understanding those suppliers, not just from environmental, but sustainability in general? Everything from, how workforces are treated through to, where your papers come from. It's the old chestnuts we've been trying to manage for some time, but they're critically important now because it's not as easy to jump on a plane to go and see them even. Mm-hmm. You need to have the right mechanisms in place to understand that the books are being produced well, in a way that stands up to audit, and you're using the right paper, so that, from all aspects of sustainability, you've got it covered.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you for that. And Jude, anything else to add on?
Not really. We'd sort of put together an environmental team at Faber and just got our policy onto the website, and we're all invigorated. And then same as Barbara, it was, how can we just still make books and put them in the market? But we're re-engaging with it. It is critically important for the planet, for mankind. So it's something that is back on our agenda quite strongly. I think it probably, the main thing is we have to make a product using stuff and not harm the environment, and which is quite tricky. So I think the Publishers Association have just did a good presentation on it, which I've seen. So we're going to, hook up with them and look into that more. It is critical, but do we take off it's little questions every day. Is it better to use the matte laminate, or is it better to have an uncoated cover that scuffs easily so people throw it? There's all those little questions. Should we truck it from Europe? Should we ship it from China? And it's hard to get definitive answers on that. And that would be lovely, just a little checklist of good, bad, good, bad. But I think, every scenario is so slightly different. That I think publishers putting their heads together now is really, really good. And that communication and that support throughout the supply chain is going to be crucial.
Yeah. And leading on from that, a question for all of you. When I was at Cambridge, I was very much involved with Calmstone and the Book Chain project, where you're looking at the sustainability of your papers and where they're coming from, where you're looking at the printers and how they are performing, and covering things like modern slavery. I never thought 25 years ago when I got into publishing, I'd sit in meetings on modern slavery, but that's the world we're now in. And obviously around PIPs and what you're doing, the materials that you're putting into your books. Are you all taking advantage of that? These sort of things that are out there? Gareth?
Yeah, I mean, the Book Chain project specifically, I have to confess, books were into it rather than later than my colleagues in journals in TNF that really got involved early. But yeah, interestingly, we were having a discussion about that earlier this week, because for that very reason, there is a lot of information that's been gathered. There's a lot of guidelines. There's a lot of self-auditing, and really it's about how we leverage that to try and make sure we can use it. I think it's projects like that that will make all the difference now, rather than us constantly doing our own vetting, which is going to become harder and harder to do. just when compliance is becoming more and more important. You know, the Dow Jones Sustainability Index is a really important thing that we try to do every year as part of the Informa group that owns us. And, you know, for all of those needs, things like BookChain seem critical. You know, they're not going to become less important, they're going to become more important.
Okay, that's good to know. Jude, are you using BookChain, or is that?
It tends to be the cost of these things that, you know, for smaller publishers, it's to join up. I mean, you know, I was looking on the website actually just today, saying it's come on the agenda, and there is loads of useful information on it. And I downloaded the you know, the criteria for the slavery and the environment, and it is really useful. Yeah, it's just putting it all together, and I think, you know, that's what Gareth said. It's that joined up approach rather than everybody just looking at each individual title and how it's shipping across the world.
Barbara, are you using it?
I got to know BookChain many years ago when I was working in this international role. So I know it, and I have also an access here to it, but in Germany, to be honest, we don't work with it. It's an UK tool in a way. Of course, we have a look in and we can see what is in, but from my perspective, the data material could be better. It's not always very good. It depends a bit on who is putting it in, and who is it depends a lot of the sources where they come from, these data. I think in general also, maybe also not to be misunderstood, of course, sustainability and the environment is very important for us, and we have it on our agenda very on top in the meantime again. And so we have we try to build an own thing like BookChain in a way in our Bertelsmann world together with the printers. And so we do something like that. And at the end of the day, I think, yes, something like BookChain is very helpful and important.
And Kathy, are you?
I became aware of BookChain a few months ago, and I've had a few conversations about it, and we're just beginning to explore how we want to engage in our own sustainability efforts and statements.
Okay. This is all very good, and I'm just noticing the time, and I'm sure we could carry on talking about all the things that we're doing for much longer than we have today, but I'm afraid that I need to ask just one last question of you all, and that is, what would be your top takeaway point for everybody listening to this webinar this afternoon? So if I go, Barbara, what would be your top takeaway point?
From me today is that everybody has the same issue at the moment in publishing: standardization, environment, taking care of print runs, production risk, how much books do I put in my shelf or not, so short runs or even print on demand, to avoid exactly this problem, because a printed book which is not sold but thrown away is also a big impact for the environment. So this is something we should take into our minds again and again.
Okay. Kathy, your big takeaway point?
I would say that we need to plan as early as possible for life of title and position ourselves to be able to make decisions on how, when, and where to print as rapidly as possible, pivot to market conditions as they arise.
Okay. Gareth?
I think it's similar to Kathy's, really. We're in a world now where no one wants to wait. We're all used to being able to go on, Google the availability of something, find it. If it's not instantly available, the days when you go into a bookstore 20 years ago and you'd find it was on reprint under consideration are well past. You know, if it's not available now, you'll find something else, you'll move on. So you've got to have your content globally available in the way the customer wants it, when they want it, in whatever format they want it, ebook, hardback, paperback, you name it. If you don't, you'll just lose out. Now, and more than that, you'll get fined by certain large retailers. And therefore, it's about within the constraints where stock is almost a dirty word in some aspects. And so you've got to bring that level of stock down. You've got to reduce your working capital. you've got to somehow get that availability up and really fast supply to customers who, some of them, they don't even hold the books themselves. You know, the smaller internet retailers, they sell it to their customer and then they order it from you and they've got to get it in and cross-dock it. So that supply chain has got to be incredibly robust. So I'm talking too much here, but it really is about everything now.
Okay. And Jude, finally.
Sort of looking at it from an internal perspective, I would say try and slow down, try and fight for that time in the schedule that we never get. It is our time to say, we actually really do need this time. We need this time to check. We need this time to, you know, add those extra deliveries. We need this time to adjust processes if we need to. So, and also don't assume that things can just carry on as before. I think always, like Kathy said, that planning ahead, especially moving into Brexit, didn't want to say it, you know, in this, but moving there, that is going to be very key.
Okay, thank you all very much for that. Just before we move to asking the audience questions, I want to check, Rick, do you have a question for our panelists?
I do. I'm trying to start my video again here, but while that's getting started, here we go. Thank you first for all your comments today, by the way. This has been very informative and very much of interest to HP. I want to go, hopefully not too controversial here, but perhaps begin to think a bit more on HP's direct interaction. And I couldn't help it but ask on behalf of our customers, which are the print service providers. And that is, has COVID changed what you look for in a print service provider, or how has it changed your relationships? And maybe perhaps a way to put that in some type of a framework is has it changed, or could you describe how it's affected your top criteria for what you look in a print service provider? Things like speed to delivery, cost, other services they provide, breadth of media, et cetera.
That to everybody?
Well, I would say that it's increased my need to find vendors who can produce what we need, how we need it, and when we need it. All of those things.
Yeah, I think reliability has been absolutely, you know, as we've had to deal with very unpredictable demand, whilst there are increasingly few buffers in the system, you know, less of that stock that cushions suppliers from end customers and their legitimate demands. It's vital that those suppliers are able to be extremely responsive and understand the needs of customers. And, you know, suppliers have come a huge way in the last decade in doing so. But nonetheless, when it comes down to customer, you know, the suppliers who will go, well, actually, you know what, we can't do this. We thought we could. That's impossible if you've got a customer there who's demanding it now. There's an adoption starting this week or whatever. They need to have that book. So it's got to be about robust, customer focused. And I'm not talking about us as the customer. I'm talking about the end customer. That customer focus.
Okay, shall we now pick up with some of the audience questions? So the first question I have here is, there is a lot of talk on POD or short run as a consideration, but the unit costs are still high. How do you square that with the economics of scale one gets from larger print runs? Who would like to take that first? Judith. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Well, what works best for us in POD actually is our play scripts, because they're very short in terms of extent, and they can take a high price point. There are some titles we just can't do in POD because we can't put the price up high enough to justify it. We do increase the price on POD titles sometimes, not all the time. But it does have to move to a different sales model. I mean, you know, it's guaranteed that is a guaranteed sale, but it is slightly different to the short run, just the normal short run digital print.
Okay, and Gareth, have you?
Yeah, I'm kind of blessed in a sense because I work in academic publishing now, and we do charge more than the equivalent trade publishers. So, you know, we're conscious that we do have that flexibility, and in that sense, the advantage of print on demand doubled because we print an awful lot of books in shorter run anyway. They would have been in digital in one form or another. It's undeniable that POD costs more money. If your book is a standard monochrome book, though, the extra cost when you offset against distribution savings still make it unarguable, especially in an area where demand is erratic. And to be, as a person in my first job in publishing, on day one, I was told to get some books pulped. That stays with you. And I've pulped far too many books in my life. It's not something I prefer to do if I can avoid it. I think what it's something it's worth just mentioning is there are some types of books which are, you know, inevitably expensive. We have architecture books too. We have medical books with x-rays and such like. There are some kind of books which POD is extremely expensive, but the technology is changing. We benefited hugely when inkjet came in originally, and that allowed prices to come down. As inkjet began to be used for POD, that helped bring POD pricing down. And one of the areas now is really around premium color. And different manufacturers, I'm not going to give any name checks here, you know, different manufacturers got slightly different approaches to premium color, and I wouldn't say at the moment that it can do every type of color book, but the number that it can do is changing. And it's partly about understanding what customers' needs are, educating authors, educating editors, making sure people are comfortable, so that where you can move titles onto what I would call a premium inkjet, not standard inkjet, and therefore benefit from some of those cost savings, you do so. Some, you know, you're not going to put a photography book on that right now, but actually architecture is one of those areas that looks like it's starting to transition. So it's, you know, it's constantly looking at the new technologies and working with the printers who've got that and are understanding, and they're putting a huge amount of effort in to try and understand what they can deliver, what paper works best with what press, with what inks, and so on and so forth. And as they continue to work at that, to then get the advantage, get the benefit from that.
So I'm going to have to ask Kathy and Barbara a quick answer on this.
Sorry.
Do you agree with that analysis from Judith and Gareth there?
Yes, I do.
Yes,
So,
and I would also say that we're really changing our model in terms of how we look at unit cost over life of title instead of per unit.
and
I would
of
actually.
course, it depends on what kind of book it is, of course. In educational books, where the content is relevant, it's another thing, like in a haptic, nice coffee table book, for example. So in a way, you have to make a difference between these kind of books. But in a way, in total, I agree.
I would say it's also looking at the total cost. Yes,
Yeah,
POD
right.
printing is higher,
Right.
but if you're not warehousing it, if you're not storing it, and the shipping is done differently,
Yeah.
then, and that's what I think publishers should be moving towards.
Yeah.
Knowing what it's all costing them.
Just as a quick, I know time is pressing, but a quick example, in the US, it's a big country, you might be using a supplier on the East Coast, but if your customer is in Oregon or something, you could be transporting it as far as if you're shipping it from the UK to New York. You know, so the cost of shipping can be more than your unit cost on a cheap monochrome book. So it's really about understanding real relevant costs, as you say.
Full cost for the book. I've just had a note here. A mantra is that publishers need to give up the obsession with unit cost. Yes, they do. They need to look at all of it. A question for Judith. You mentioned the strategy of publishing in digital first and print later during the pandemic. What was your experience of that? And is that something you would continue until the dust on COVID settles?
What was did I experience it? It was fine, I think. I think it worked pretty well. I think the ebook just got ready quite quickly and sent out, and then we had a bit longer to print. I think the sales of the ebook were good. I think we've done it before though, pre-COVID, and we have quite a joined up E and P and A even strategy now. So I think it is something that, you know, we're going to play about with a lot more, depending on the title and the strategy behind it. So yeah, it worked well.
Okay, and same question, although it came in for Kathy and Barbara. Kathy first. Are you publishing things in E first and print and?
I haven't done that at Princeton. I experienced it at HarperCollins, but no, not at Princeton.
Okay.
Not a lot. We have books which appear only as ebooks, but in general, e-first is very rare here. And what we found out in COVID, that the ebook sales did not go up. They were quite stable, and the printed books went up. So this was something which astonished us a lot, because in a way you should have meant it different, but ebooks are not increasing anymore here in our German market.
Kathy, a question for you. Has the outsourcing strategy changed in the wake of the pandemic? Has it become more local or happy to source print from any country? What are you doing on that?
Okay, outsourcing print to other countries. We do quite a lot of our 4-color printing, either Eastern Europe, or Far East. We do about 50 titles a year simultaneously, US, UK, and we're working with POD vendors pretty much around the world. We're looking at some new ones in China and Latin America right now.
But so it hasn't really changed your strategy at the moment because of COVID?
I would say it's increased the desire for speed and all those things, but not specifically because of COVID, no.
Okay, so I think we have time for about one more question very quickly. What are the key points you would look at firming up a printer partner globally with respect to print capability or print capacity or technology maturity in terms of ingesting and managing your content, or all of the above in that order? That's quite a deep question, but I suppose that's very difficult with COVID. As you said, you can't visit, you can't see what a printer's doing. So any advice that you could offer to this panelist and maybe others of how you'll say sourcing new printers and what they're able to do for you when you can't do the normal things of go and see them?
Yeah, we had this exact situation. We published a children's book about why you can't hug, and we sourced a UK supplier for it. Well, my colleague did, and it's a bit of a punt, you know. You can't go and visit. You can't do the normal site visits and checks that you would do. So you take recommendations. You ask other publishers if they've used them. You see who they print for. Just those usual questions, but just a bit more careful, I think, and sort of checking out their reliability without having that hands-on or eyes-on aspect of the decision process.
I've just seen a note has come in from Kathy saying that she's actually gone on a virtual plant tour recently.
It was good.
So,
I enjoyed it.
Well, that's good. Rick, do you have any more? One last question or anything? We are at the hour now, so.
I would, on behalf of HP, and I would like to thank everyone for their participation today. Certainly, Simon, thank you for your moderation. And I hope everyone was able to take something away and learn from this today's webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I'd like to thank all the audience for being here and attending, all the participants and panelists today. And thank you very much again to HP and you, Rick, for sorting all of this out for all of us. And for those behind the scenes who have been putting us all up and changing all the things as we've gone through this webinar session today. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.